I'm realizing through this experience that that's not enough, because if I'm not racist or anti-racist and I'm just keeping that within myself, that's not really like great. I guess I'm okay, but I'm not doing anything for the rest of the world or using my platform, which is a disservice to myself and pretty much everybody as well.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Social Justice in Women's Hockey. I am your host, Erica L. Ayala. On this episode, I am joined by Rebecca Morse, aka Moose, and Madison Packer. They are captains of the Metropolitan Riveters in the National Women's Hockey League. We have a critical conversation, but it is all framed around 6 questions. And so, the question of the day is actually a series of questions. So here are your questions of the day, posting them up for you now, but they're all surrounding questions and key questions we should be asking when having conversations about anti-racism. I want to thank Packer and Moose for joining me on this episode. We have a great conversation. And another little bonus engagement activity for you. I am naming this episode, title is #BlackRosie. So once you get to the part where you think you figured out why we named this Black Rosie, go ahead and type that in the comments. As always, thank you so much for joining me on this series, Social Justice in Women's Hockey. We've had a lot of amazing conversations with some wonderful people in hockey, and we hope it continues. So here now is my conversation with Madison Packer and Moose. All right, so I'm here with the captains of some team. You've probably heard me talk about them from time to time, the Metropolitan Riveters of the National Women's Hockey League, with Rebecca Moose Morse and Madison Packer. How are we doing today?
Doing pretty good. Excited to talk about this today. Obviously, topic is a little bit uncomfortable for some people, myself included, but the conversation that needs to happen. So I'm really looking forward to it and just hearing your perspective, Erica, and Packer's as well. Being teammates with her for over 4 years now.
Yeah, like Moose said, I'm excited to talk. And I think for me, most importantly, learn your perspective and what Moose has to share, and just continue to educate myself on something that's super important, not only in the world, especially in sports and in the locker room. So.
Yeah, and thank you both. And we're going to do things a little bit differently than we've done some of the conversations. So we've had 2 people on before, obviously, Allie and Blake joined me for the first episode, but I really wanted to focus maybe on some things and we'll kind of practice what hopefully other people can do, and just kind of getting a little bit more comfortable in even using certain language. And for this conversation, we're going to focus on kind of 6 questions around anti-racism, because I think that is a term that is being used a lot right now, but I think it means different things to different people at different times. So I want to just start with the big question, and either one of you can start, but when you hear anti-racism, what does that mean to you?
So obviously, like, the exact definition would be opposing racism, but like you said, Erica, people are interpreting it different ways. It means something different to different people. And to me, really what it means is taking an active role in eliminating racism and calling it out when you do see it. I think part of that is having an understanding of Black history in America so that you can explain systemic racism and racial injustice to others. Because I think without that knowledge, it's really hard to develop a stance. And, as I think a lot of people in this series have shared, it's not enough to just not be racist. And I think in the women's hockey space in particular, at least in conversations that I've had with a lot of my teammates, current and past teammates, their understanding or their experience is that, people in hockey aren't racist, or people in women's hockey at least aren't racist. One, that I don't believe that that's true. And 2, when in the cases where it is true, that's still not even enough to get to the desired result, which is having anti-racism across the board and a united front in that regard.
Yeah, I think like Moose said, I mean, the most obvious what comes to mind is opposing racism. I think there are a lot of anti-campaigns on various, social issues or what it might be, but I think this is different. It's, not, I reached out to you a while back because I wasn't, I'm typically very comfortable, getting on social media and showing my support and backing something. And this was different because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to be supportive. And I feel like the anti part is important, that I may not view myself as a racist person, and I may not associate and hang out with people who I knowingly, are, to my knowledge, that are racist. But it's more than that. It's, being active when you see it happening. It's creating an environment where it's not tolerated. And it's not always, I don't think it's always as easy to find. And I learned, I've been trying to educate myself and reading things and listening to a lot of conversations that Anya's having. And I think that the biggest thing where like really clicked for me was, and I don't remember where I heard it, but someone said, Jewish people for a long time have been oppressed, but a Jewish person can walk into a room, and if they have a very Jewish name, say that their name is Bob Smith, right? Whereas a Black person might walk into a room where there are people who don't like people of color. They can't change. They can't be anybody else. And I think that for me was the first time that I understood, kind of that I've never experienced that. Even as a gay person in America, I've never had that feeling of someone not liking me because of the way that I looked, or having an issue with me because of the way I lived my life. And so I think, anti-racism is not only opposing it when you see it happening, but creating an environment, whether it's on your team or in our sport or wherever we can, where it absolutely is not tolerated, and making that very clear.
I think that that's been something when we talk about anti-racism, that has been a piece always that I try to figure out for myself, but then also open up that conversation and that intersectionality as well when talking about racism, which leads me to the next piece of that. So this is like, of our 6 questions, this is, 1B. So if we've identified what anti-racism is, then I would love to hear from both of you, and we'll start perhaps with you, Packer, about then what is allyship for you?
So I was watching a news segment, and I think it was Chris Cuomo who said, "I don't like the term ally because like it implies that I feel obligated to like lend this helping hand," which further confused me because I was like, if I'm not an ally, then what am I? But I think that it just means like I consider myself an ally in the world of mental health. I don't necessarily struggle every day in a lot of the ways that my spouse does with mental health, but I speak out about it. I use myself as a voice and a platform. And I think that, so allies are super important in realms that they don't necessarily understand or experience themselves. So for me, it's recognizing that I will never understand what it's like to be an African-American woman playing hockey or living in America. But I will do my best every day to try to understand what that's like, and, fight that battle as if I am one of those people, and supporting and speaking out against and standing up for people who are oppressed and continue to be oppressed.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, my sort of definition of allyship is standing alongside the Black community in the fight for racial equality and racial justice, working and collaborating with members of this community, but taking some of the weight off of them in terms of educating others and building initiatives that promote diversity and inclusion. So if I think about it in context of my life and my network, my community, right, Packer and I are veterans for the Riveters. We've played for multiple years now, and serve in a leadership role. Myself being from New Jersey, I have a network in the New Jersey and New York City metro area within hockey and outside hockey. And obviously, as things currently stand, we have one African-American teammate who's signed for the upcoming season, Soraya Tinker. And, I've reached out to her and tried to, without even really knowing her. So I felt it's kind of difficult because I was like, okay, do I start with introducing myself and sharing a little bit about myself, and then maybe giving her the floor to tell me a little bit about, her background, where she came from, what she's looking forward to, if she has any questions about playing in the NWHL. Do I do that, or dive right into the issue at hand? Because that's sort of when I got connected with her and, had a Zoom call with her, just her and I, and given the recent events, I couldn't ignore it. I didn't want to ignore it, but like I said, like as it currently stands, that's one Black player on our team. And I think in the past, typically when that's the situation, I mean, she has an interest in, she's actively involved a lot on social media, been having different conversations like these, and has had proper diversity and inclusion training. So she has all this knowledge in her head, right? And she's an African-American woman. So it typically falls on that person, somebody in that role, to be the one to educate others. And I think as an ally, you have to step in and take some of that weight off of that person. Work with her, introduce her to my network, try and connect her with organizations like Hockey in New Jersey, Hockey in Harlem, that I have relationships with people there, and, have volunteered a little bit before, but I'd like to do much more in the future. And, she's going to be a professional athlete for the first time in her life. She has to deal with that. And then also, this big push that we're seeing pretty much everywhere to at least promote diversity and inclusion. And I want to take that even a step further and really have our league be the model. And I know that the WNBA is really already there in women's sports in terms of what they've already done in the past, but learn from them and work together to combat this fight. And because we have that problem in hockey, because there's lack of diversity, that's often across different teams, across different leagues, that's often the case. And they can't do it all on their own. Like Packer said, there's no way that we could fully understand the experiences they've had to go through, growing up African American, but we can do our best to try, and then, not put too much burden on them, educating others, but taking on some of that responsibility ourselves, holding ourselves accountable, and then holding our teammates, the league, our fans. Most of us work full-time jobs also. So holding our coworkers, our families, our friends outside of hockey accountable as well. And that's really what I hope to do, sort of be a buffer this upcoming season and shoulder some of that responsibility.
Yeah, I want to take what both of you are saying before I kind of chime in a little bit. Moose, particularly as you were just speaking, and I've never been a hockey player, but I've been on teams before, and I think there are a lot of these ideas, and I've been a captain before. There are a lot of these ideas that we have, and some people hold true to them, some people don't, about what it means to lead and what it means to lead in a sports space. And I'm just curious to get your thoughts on, have you thought about taking your approach to leadership when it comes to hockey, and what that, or how that can help you when it comes to being a leader in anti-racism work?
I think as a league, the NWHL, and even women's hockey as a whole, we are generally pretty accepting, I would say. There's always room for improvement. But, we had the first trans player in our league, for example, Harrison Brown. And I think in terms of that, like, we're pretty progressive and forward thinking, or at least because we've had a first, that's the way it's perceived by other people. And it's kind of like, from a fan's perspective, I would think if that's something that you don't understand or agree with, either you don't support that team or support that league, and you're basically not a fan. So I think very much it's sort of, politics or whatever you want to call it, acceptance in general, does intersect with the sport, because if people see that and they don't agree with it, then they might not be a fan of our league or our sport. And obviously there are a lot of gay people in women's hockey. There's no there's no sugarcoating that. I think we're a pretty accepting sport. At the same time, that hasn't always been my experience. You know, me identifying as a gay woman, it hasn't always been easy for me. But I think it's a safer space than, you know, if I were to go to my 9-to-5 job and probably see a lot less gay people. Then I think at this point, how I want to shift that is not just, you know, being a part of the LGBTQ plus community and sharing and educating people on what it's like in my experience growing up that way as part of that community, but also talk about racial injustice and educating them on Black history in America as I continue to educate myself, because I still have, it's really just the tip of the iceberg. I feel like it's every day that I'm watching or consuming something different is helping me learn more, in addition to talking to people in my network. So as I continue to do that, I'm sort of carving my approach to having those conversations with people in the hockey space and outside of it.
Yeah. Packer, you know, what's your take on that, about taking your leadership and what you are in a position to do as a leader in hockey and then translating that?
Yeah, so I think you're going to hear me continue to use a lot of like cliche quotes because I've been reading nonstop, and my wife is like phenomenal with finding resources and like trying to solve the world's problems, but also just trying to educate herself, I guess. So another thing I read that was like, the solution to a problem appears easier the further removed you are from said problem. And I think that that is something that in the last 3 weeks has become abundantly clear to me. Just especially we're in Northern Michigan, kind of isolated by ourselves, and we've, you know, had some conversations mostly with older generations and primarily white people. And I think that you know, the biggest thing is continuing to have the conversation and whether it's racism or, like Moose said, inclusion for the LGBTQ plus community. There are so many areas where we need to shift as society, but especially, you know, in terms of the racism conversation. And I think that people just don't understand it, and they're afraid. People are afraid of what they don't understand. And you know, you and I talked back when COVID first hit about, you know, how much I enjoyed my team last season, and speaking out about things, and how I feel like it's become a lot easier in the locker room. And I think that a lot of that, as Moose said, is because of the culture of hockey and just kind of the uniqueness in our close-knit family within the sport. But also I think that as younger generations grow up, they're growing up and they're seeing these issues happen, and it's important for people in a position of leadership, whether it's small or big, to use their voice for positivity. I think a lot about the fact that I've got a kid on the way, and I would be mortified if he did anything, you know, hateful or hurtful, or but it's hard work. I mean, those kinds of things. Hatred is a learned behavior, right? And so the more that I can stand up as, you know, someone who people might look up to, or, you know, Moose, you know, people watch play, they're like, oh, she's so cool. Like, they want to be like those people, right? And if we can use our platforms for positivity, and not just leadership, but I think platforms as female athletes, obviously captains in the locker room, our voice goes a little louder. So educating our teammates and then turning them into leaders in the community. And I work with 6 older, you know, people who are much older than me, and we have a lot of these conversations, and my perspective is way different, but I'm 25 years younger. So I think the biggest thing is just continuing the conversation and not speaking from a place of, you know, I know better than you, but this is my experience and this is where I've had those experiences, and getting people more comfortable with the uncomfortable until it becomes normal.
You know, we talked a little bit already about what you can do as leaders, but I also want to think about, sometimes people will have a conversation like this and I'm like, ooh, did it, nailed it, all right, we move on. But I wanted to ask you, you know, if you see value, or why you see value perhaps in having these conversations be ongoing.
I think if they're not ongoing, it seems more performative. And I think we've seen a lot of that demonstrated by corporations across the country, across the world. It's because everyone's putting out a statement. Even amongst athletes, everyone's putting out a statement. So, you know, you feel the need to as well. And I don't think that's really what it's about, because history is going to repeat itself if this is just a temporary thing where we're focused on it for a month or two and then it goes away. Real change can't happen that way. Anti-racism needs to become the new norm, and that's why it's an ongoing thing. And that's personally, I think that's sort of why I took the approach of after the incident with George Floyd, instead of posting a statement about how I felt about it, saying it's wrong, I've just been really internalizing things. And that's how I am as a person. Like any decision I have to make, really regardless of the size, I really just internalize it, reflect on it, ponder it, and then go out and talk to people. I don't just act on impulse and like reach out to someone and start asking them questions and saying, you know, what can I do? I really try to use my own resources, or, you know, the internet. The internet's great. And educate myself, and then go to others and see where the gaps are, right? So the way I handle it is, instead of putting out a statement, I started watching this series that you've been doing, Erica, and that's really helped me hear from my peers, because again, this is not a topic that we really ever talk about. And because it's at the forefront right now, people are talking about it, but it's not something we talk about because that's what's happened in the past. We talk about it for a short amount of time and then we move on to the next thing. I listened to the first series and the first episode of the series, and then Allie and Blake, and that's when I really felt comfortable. I mean, I'm not someone who's ever been outspoken. I'm kind of a quiet, shy person, to be quite honest. And I think through, you know, playing hockey professionally, it's helped me get out of my comfort zone and speak out a little bit more. But this is really like a huge awakening for me, to be honest, where I'm more comfortable talking about these things, because I think I'm misinterpreted a lot because I'm quiet about things, and people perceive that as me not having an opinion or not feeling strongly about things, when that's not really who I am at all. I do have strong opinions. I think I'm a pretty open-minded person, but that's how I process things. And I very much internalize it, but I'm realizing through this experience that that's not enough, because if I'm not racist or anti-racist and I'm just keeping that within myself, that's not really like great. I guess I'm okay, but I'm not doing anything for the rest of the world or using my platform, which is a disservice to myself and pretty much everybody as well. So instead of putting out a statement, I really just reflected on everything I had learned thus far and what I was going to do. And it was really very like basic and intro level, because I had really just started to do my own education. And from there, that's when I decided to reach out to Soraya and have a conversation with her, and, you know, educate myself in other ways through TV, movies, through podcasts, through this series, through listening to the Black Girl Hockey Club's Juneteenth panel discussion from this past weekend. So I feel like I'm moving closer, and given the current circumstances, I think it's difficult. Obviously, with technology, there are so many ways to communicate with people, but I'm sort of preparing right now for the future and how I'm going to keep this moving forward once, you know, we go into our season and can make a larger impact. Because right now, all we pretty much have is communicating virtually and social media. And I think people are starting to see each other more, but I think in terms of like getting people together, we're putting the plan in motion now for once things sort of go back to normal a little bit. And at this point, not knowing, you know, when we're going to be playing hockey again, when our team is going to be together again, I think having this time to sort of prepare for how we're going to promote diversity and inclusion and keep the conversation going, I'm really just using that time to focus on that while educating myself.
Pax, you want to add anything?
Sorry,
Sure.
rant.
That's all right. Yeah, I mean, Moose touched on a lot of different points. I think that, most notably, it's not something that's ever going to go away, like the conversation itself, because you're always, and that's, I think a horrible thing to say. And if I'm saying something I shouldn't, then please let me know afterwards. But I think that you're always going to have hateful people. I think you're always going to have hateful people, right? And I mean, it's like Moose said, look at history is destined to repeat itself. Women have made progress in being able to vote and being treated equally in the workplace, but they're still fighting to get paid as equals, right? Whether it's in sports or corporate America. You look at the gay community. Now we can get married. We can, walk down the street in some places holding hands without being judged. But last week, 2 weeks ago, they tried to pass a bill to take rights away from the LGBTQ plus community. The same thing in the African American community. You're always going to have people who are just bad people. And I think the more of us who commit to being good people and keeping the conversation prevalent, like if you say the cliche is, people are tired of talking about it. Well, if you're tired of talking about it, imagine how tired people are of being made to feel, differently or lesser just because of something they can't control. And I think that it's so easy to just say, be a good person and treat people the way you want to be treated. But at the end of, we're all around for hopefully 100 years, right? Give or take. But at the end of it, what else matters except for the way you're remembered for how you treat people? And it's such a simple thing to say, but like, that's how I live my life. And that's how I think most people should live their lives. And like, the conversation is going to continue to go on and on, as it should, because it's important. But the way to make change is to have those conversations, and not get political, but you have to use your voice and your platform in a good way and educate people on, what different things make differences in different societies, as far as like local governments, communities, things like that. Like, that's where the grassroots really start. And I think that, it's great to have all these companies come out and release statements and run campaigns, but it's not a slogan, right? Like, it's a real thing that people experience every day. And it's horrible. It's upsetting. It's not something that you ever want to see, but it's also heartbreaking. Like, I reached out to you when everything started hitting the media, because I didn't fully will never know what it feels like, and I've never had to fear that, right? Anya and I had talked about it. Like, we'll never have to have a conversation with our son about and be fearful when he gets pulled over by the police, right? But that's a real conversation that occurs in the African American community, and it's so if we move on from this issue to the next one, it's going to happen again. And that's what we have to drive home to people, is that we cannot move on until we find a solution or an education in the system, some way for it to change, because it's gone on for too long. It's not something that's okay. It's not something that should happen here or anywhere. And the only way to find a solution is to continue to talk about it, so that people are tired of hearing about it, so that we find a solution.
Yeah. Amen.
I walk into the locker room every day with the Riveters, and that's how I feel. Like, I feel like it doesn't matter what I look like, who I am, how I live my life or identify. My teammates love me. But, with everything that's gone on and continues to go on in the world, it's the first time where I've stopped and thought, maybe someone sitting next to me doesn't feel that way.
It needs to happen, because that's the way that we're going to grow the game. It's in everyone's best interest. And I want little children of all races to be able to see themselves, whether it's on the Riveters roster, in women's hockey, across women's hockey, or something as simple as the logo, because it seems so trivial. The fact that Rosie is white, and obviously our logo is modeled after the iconic poster, essentially. And that's the way it was. But that's also perpetuating history, right? Because that's not, in all contexts, it's not always a white Rosie. Like, that isn't sexual 100% of the time.